They didn't use the word nursing home at first. They never do. They said it would be temporary. They said it was for my own good. They said words like support and safety and less stress, as if those things could only exist behind locked doors and scheduled meals. I listened without interrupting, hands folded in my lap, my face calm enough to reassure them that their plan was working. I have learned in my 78 years that people reveal far more when you don't rush to correct them. Evan stood near the window of my living room while he spoke, arms crossed, posture careful. He looked older than I remembered, though that might have been the weight of authority he'd recently discovered he could wield. My son had always liked positions that came with titles: manager, executor, decision maker. He spoke now with the quiet confidence of someone who believed the paperwork was already settled. Claire sat on the edge of the sofa, perfectly arranged, ankles crossed, hands resting lightly on her knee. She nodded at the right moments, adding gentle affirmations. Yes, Ruth, we've thought about everything without ever quite meeting my eyes. Claire never pushed directly, she preferred momentum. If she kept things moving, people rarely stopped to ask questions. You won't have to worry about anything, Evan said, smiling in that tight, reassuring way he'd practiced in boardrooms. Meals, medication, checkups, it's all handled. Handled, such a useful word. It makes people feel relieved while quietly removing them from the process. And you can always come back home once things settle, Claire added quickly. This is just until we're sure you're comfortable. Comfortable. Another word that means different things depending on who says it. I nodded. Slowly, I asked no questions, not because I didn't have them, but because questions make people defensive. Silence makes them careless. They took my keys that afternoon. Evan said it was easier that way, less to misplace. Claire took my handbag and reorganized it with brisk efficiency, removing my checkbook, my spare cash, my old address book. She left my lipstick. A kindness, I suppose, something familiar to hold on to. The car ride was quiet. Evan drove. Claire sat in the passenger seat, scrolling on her phone, occasionally glancing back to smile at me as if I were a child being brought somewhere exciting. I watched the neighborhood slide past the window, the bakery on the corner, the park bench where my husband and I used to sit on Sundays, and I committed every detail to memory. When you don't know how long you'll be gone, you learn to look carefully. The building itself was clean, neutral, designed to offend no one and comfort no one either. The doors closed behind us with a sound that was softer than I expected, but final all the same. I noticed Evan didn't flinch. He'd already decided this was necessary. A woman at the desk smiled and welcomed me by name, already informed, already prepared. She spoke to Evan more than to me. He signed where she pointed. Claire watched closely, correcting nothing, trusting him to do it properly. I did not sign anything. No one asked me to. That, I think, was the moment I understood exactly what kind of story this was going to be. They showed me to my room, sparse, bed made tight enough to bounce a coin, a small dresser, one chair by the window. Claire placed a framed photograph of my husband on the sill, angled just so, as if staging proof that I was still a person with a past. We'll visit soon, Evan said, leaning in to kiss my cheek. Just get settled, okay? I smiled back, the smile of a woman who knows when to wait. The door closed, their footsteps faded. The room held its breath. I sat on the bed and listened to the building. The sounds were constant but distant, wheels rolling, voices calling names, a television playing something no one was truly watching. This place was not quiet. It was simply full of noise no one responded to. That night I did not sleep, not from fear, from attention. I learned the rhythm of the hallway, the timing of the nurses, the way doors opened and closed. Knowledge is a form of preparation. The next morning I met Mabel Green in the dining room. She was small, sharp-eyed, and entirely unimpressed. She took one look at me and said, "You're new." "I suppose I am," I replied. "They bring you in quiet ones when they think you'll behave," she said, spooning oatmeal into her mouth. "The loud ones come in kicking, they don't last long," I smiled. "And you?" "I learned early," she said. "If you want to last, you watch." We ate together in silence after that, comfortable silence. The kind that doesn't rush to fill itself. Over the next few days, I learned what Mabel already knew, which staff members noticed details, which ones didn't, which rules were flexible and which were enforced only when someone complained. I learned that being agreeable made you invisible and being invisible gave you freedom to observe. Evan didn't call. Claire sent one message, Hope you're settling in, with a heart emoji that felt borrowed. Naomi was the only one who tried to reach me directly. I saw her name flash on the screen of the communal phone once, but by the time I reached it, the call had ended. No voicemail, just the reminder that she existed outside this place thinking of me. That mattered. On the fifth night, while folding the cardigan Claire had brought, my hand brushed against something stiff in the pocket. Paper, folded, I paused. Inside was an envelope I didn't recognize, heavy, addressed in my name but not in Evan's handwriting. I hadn't opened it before, I was certain of that, I would have remembered. I sat down slowly and opened it. What I read did not make my heart race, it made it settle. Sometimes clarity arrives without drama. Sometimes it simply clicks into place like a door you didn't realize was unlocked all along. I folded the paper carefully and returned it to the pocket. I did not tell Mabel, I did not call anyone, I did not change my expression. That is the thing about power. It does not announce itself, it waits. That night, as I lay in the narrow bed listening to the building breathe around me, I made my first real decision since arriving. I would not argue, I would not demand, I would not explain, I would plan. They believed they had finished me. They believed I was contained. They had no idea that they had simply given me time, and time, when used properly, changes everything. By the third morning, I understood the schedule better than some of the staff. Breakfast at 7 sharp. Medication carts at 7:30. Physical therapy for those who still pretended it was optional. Lunch at noon. Dinner early enough to make you forget the idea of evenings entirely. Lights dimmed at 9, as if sleep could be mandated by policy. Routine is the first thing institutions use to convince you that resistance is pointless. If every hour already belongs to someone else, you stop asking which ones are yours. I did not stop asking. I simply stopped asking out loud. Mabel Green sat beside me most mornings, always choosing the same chair, her back straight, her eyes alert. She ate little, but she watched everything. I noticed she counted steps when nurses walked past, noticed which keys jingled louder, which voices softened when supervisors entered the room. "You don't talk much," she said one morning without looking at me. "I listen," I replied. She smiled then, a quick, approving curve of her mouth. "That's better." It became our unspoken arrangement. I observed the structure. She interpreted the meaning. Together, we mapped the place without ever putting anything on paper. I learned quickly who had access to phones and when, which desk drawers were locked and which were locked out of habit rather than necessity. I learned that paperwork moved slower than people assumed, and that authority here relied heavily on residents not knowing what questions to ask. That suited me just fine. Evan called on the fourth day. The phone rang at the desk first. I could hear my name being spoken, followed by a pause, then the word son. I took my time walking over. When you rush, people think you need them. "Mom," Evan said brightly, too brightly. "How are you settling in?" "I'm comfortable," I replied, true enough. Comfort, like truth, depends on definition. Claire's voice floated faintly in the background. They were on speaker. "Always together when control was involved." "That's good," she added. "We just wanted to check in, make sure everything's going smoothly." Everything. Such an inclusive word for a conversation that avoided specifics. "I appreciate the concern," I said. There it was, silence on the other end, a flicker of disappointment I could almost hear. Concern, after all, expects reassurance in return. "Well," Evan continued, "we've taken care of some things at the house, simplified a bit, you don't need to worry about that." Simplified, another word that means removal. "I see," I said. Claire stepped in smoothly. "We donated some items, things you weren't really using anymore. We kept the important pieces." Important to whom, she did not say. "I trust you did what you felt was appropriate," I replied. Evan laughed softly. Relief. He liked agreement, it made him feel competent. "We'll visit soon," he promised. "Once work calms down." The line went dead before I could respond, not rudely, efficiently. I returned the receiver to its cradle and felt nothing rise in my chest. No anger, no panic, only confirmation. "They always promise visits," Mabel said quietly when I sat back down. "Keeps them from feeling like villains?" "I don't believe in villains," I said, "just incentives." That afternoon, I tried something small. I asked a nurse for my personal documents. Not all of them, just one, my identification. She smiled politely. "Your son has those on file, for safety." "Of course," I said and let the matter drop. Resistance doesn't start with refusal, it starts with information. Later, during recreational hour, I sat near the window and pretended to read. Mabel sat across from me, her crossword untouched. They think because we're old, we're done making decisions, she said suddenly. They think because we're quiet, we agree, I replied. She chuckled. They hate it when we don't. That night, Naomi called again. This time I answered. Grandma, her voice came through thin but steady. I've been trying to reach you. I know, I said softly. They didn't tell me where you were until yesterday, she continued. I'm sorry. You're here now, I replied. That matters. There was a pause. I could hear her breathing, controlled but emotional. Are you okay? I considered the question carefully. I am aware, I said, and that's enough for the moment. She laughed weakly. That sounds like you. Listen, I added before she could say more. I may not always be able to answer, but if I call you, I need you to pick up. Always, she said without hesitation. That mattered more than she knew. After the call, I returned to my room and took the envelope from my cardigan pocket again. I read the contents once more, slower this time, letting the implications settle fully. They thought legal authority was final. They thought timing belonged to them. They were wrong on both counts. But I would not move yet. Rushing creates noise. Noise attracts attention. Attention brings interference. Instead, I waited. I let days pass without complaint. I attended meals. I followed rules. I thanked staff. I became precisely the resident they expected me to be, invisible. Manageable, finished. Mabel noticed, of course. They think you've accepted it, she said one evening as we watched the hallway empty. I have, I replied, just not in the way they think. She nodded slowly. Good. That's when things start to shift. That night, lying in the narrow bed, I listened to the building settle around me. I no longer felt enclosed. I felt positioned. They believed the doors had closed behind me. What they didn't understand was this. When you stop pushing against a wall, you can finally see where the exits are. And I had just begun to see clearly. By the end of the first week, the staff had stopped checking on me as often. That wasn't neglect. It was classification. Once a place like this decides you are settled, you disappear into the background. You become a box already checked. A problem already solved. No agitation, no complaints, no wandering, just another elderly woman who eats her meals, takes her pills, and thanks people for doing what they were paid to do. I let them believe that. Mabel Green noticed before anyone else. They've stopped hovering, she murmured as we sat near the television one afternoon. The sound turned low enough to be ignored. That means you're off their worry list. I prefer it that way, I said. She studied me from the corner of her eye. People think safety is being watched. It isn't. Safety is being overlooked. Exactly. Evan hadn't called again, neither had Claire. Their silence felt intentional now, not accidental. They had done what they came to do, signed the papers, handed me over, reorganized their lives without the inconvenience of my presence. They were already moving on. I wasn't. The envelope stayed hidden in the lining of my purse, pressed flat between old receipts and a handkerchief I no longer used. I didn't take it out often. Power grows when it's not handled constantly. Instead, I watched. I watched how files were stored behind the main desk, how some names were flagged with colored stickers and others weren't. I watched which residents had visitors and which ones were treated like permanent fixtures. I watched how quickly tone changed when the word legal entered a conversation, even casually. One afternoon, during a fire drill, I noticed something important, not the exits. Those were obvious. I noticed the staff phones. Unrestricted, unmonitored, used casually, assumed harmless. That night I told Mabel she didn't ask why. She never asked questions that would slow things down. Timing, she said instead. Always timing. Yes, I agreed. And positioning? The next morning I asked for stationery, not legal forms, not complaint paperwork, just plain paper and an envelope. The nurse looked surprised but handed them over without hesitation. Old women writing letters are not considered dangerous. I wrote slowly, deliberately, not to Evan, not to Claire, to Leonard Price. I hadn't spoken to him in years, but I remembered his reputation well enough. Discreet, precise, uninterested in spectacle. A man who understood that elder autonomy cases are rarely about money at first, they're about control. I didn't explain everything. I didn't need to. I wrote only this. Mr. Price, I am currently residing in a care facility under arrangements made without my informed consent. I remain mentally competent and require a confidential consultation regarding my legal autonomy. Discretion is essential. Ruth Holloway. I sealed the envelope, addressed it carefully, and waited. Mabel watched me slide it into the outgoing mail bin. First move, she asked. The first one that leaves a paper trail, I replied. Everything else stays quiet. That afternoon, Naomi called again. I'm coming this weekend, she said. They don't know yet. They don't need to, I replied. There was a pause. Are you sure you're okay? I smiled, though she couldn't see it. I'm exactly where I need to be. That night, as the lights dimmed and the hallway settled into its familiar hush, I lay awake and listened. Not for footsteps, for opportunity. Evan believed the legal authority he held made him untouchable. Claire believed polish could smooth over any consequence. They both believed time was on their side. They had made one mistake. They assumed I would rush. I wouldn't. Because power doesn't announce itself. It doesn't demand. It doesn't panic. It waits. And somewhere beyond these walls, a letter was moving quietly through the system, carrying my name not as a patient, not as an obligation, but as a woman who had not finished deciding her own life. The reply came on a Tuesday, not by email, not by phone, by mail. That alone told me Leonard Price had understood exactly what I was asking for. The envelope was plain, cream-colored, with my name typed carefully on the front. No firm logo, no return address that would draw attention. Evan had always been the one who collected the mail when he visited, standing too close, glancing at envelopes that weren't his. But he hadn't come by in days. The quiet he'd left behind felt intentional now, like a pause before something heavier. I waited until after lunch to open it, not out of fear, out of habit. I had learned over decades that important things deserved space, not haste. Inside was a single letter and a thin folder. Leonard's handwriting was neat, restrained. He wrote that he had reviewed the documents Evan had filed when he moved me here, the power of attorney, the medical consent forms, the temporary placement agreement that wasn't temporary at all if you read the fine print slowly enough. Leonard didn't use dramatic language. He didn't need to. His sentences were clean, deliberate, and unsettling in their precision. He confirmed what I had already suspected. I had not been declared incompetent. No medical board had signed off on my confinement. No court had reviewed the transfer of authority. Evan had acted preemptively, assuming compliance would follow because it usually did. The folder contained copies of everything, every signature, every clause, every quiet overreach disguised as care. I closed it and sat very still. Across the room, Mabel Green was pretending to nap, her mouth slightly open, eyes closed just enough to pass. She had mastered the art of being underestimated. When she cracked one eye open and looked at me, I knew she had been watching my face the whole time. That look, she said softly, means someone finally put their foot where it belongs. I smiled without meaning to. Leonard's letter ended with a simple question. Do you want to reclaim control quietly, or do you want to expose how it was taken? That was the moment the air in the room changed. Not with anger, with clarity. I thought about Evan's voice when he said, "It's for your own good." About Claire's smile when she said, "You'll be safer here." About how neither of them had asked me anything at all. I wanted control, but more than that, I wanted accuracy. That evening, I asked for the phone. The nurse hesitated, then handed it over. People rarely question politeness delivered calmly enough. Leonard answered on the second ring. "I'd like to proceed," I said. "Quietly?" he asked. "Precisely," I replied. He explained the steps, a revocation, a challenge, a restructuring of authority that would leave Evan legally exposed without public spectacle. The kind of correction that doesn't shout but cannot be ignored. "Are you prepared for resistance?" Leonard asked. I looked across the room at Mabel, who was now fully awake, pretending to read while clearly listening. "I've been underestimated my entire life," I said. "I'm familiar with resistance." That night I slept deeply for the first time since arriving, not because I felt safe, because I felt prepared. When silence stops protecting them, Evan came on Thursday. I knew it was him before the nurse announced it. He had a way of entering spaces like he expected them to rearrange themselves for him. Confident, polite, certain of his position. Claire followed 2 steps behind, composed as ever, handbag tucked neatly under her arm like an accessory chosen to match the tone of concern she planned to perform. "Mom," Evan said, smiling too quickly. "You look settled?" "I am," I replied. That unsettled him. They sat across from me in the small visiting room. Claire crossed her legs carefully, smoothing imaginary wrinkles from her skirt. Evan leaned forward, forearms on his knees, ready to manage the conversation. "We've been meaning to check in," he said. "Things have been hectic." "They usually are," I answered. Claire tilted her head. "We just want to make sure you're comfortable, adjusting well." "I am," I said again. "Are you?" The question landed wrong. Evan cleared his throat. "There's been some paperwork," he began. "Routine stuff. The facility needed confirmation on a few things." "Yes," I said calmly. "I'm aware." His eyes flicked up just briefly. "I've retained legal counsel," I continued. The room went still. Claire blinked. Evan straightened. "A lawyer," he said. "Mom, that's really not necessary." "Neither was moving me here without my consent," I replied. Claire's voice softened. "We didn't want to upset you." "You avoided asking me because you didn't want resistance," I said. "There's a difference." Evan's jaw tightened. "Everything we did was within our rights." "That remains to be seen," I said evenly. Silence stretched. Not uncomfortable for me, for them it was unbearable. Claire tried again. "Let's not make this adversarial." "I didn't," I said. "You did. I'm simply responding." Evan stood. "This is emotional," he said. "You're not thinking clearly." I looked at him then, really looked. "I am thinking more clearly than I have in years," I said. "That's what frightens you." He stopped pacing. "You assumed authority meant immunity," I continued. "It doesn't, it means accountability." They left shortly after, no shouting. No threats, just retreat disguised as dignity. Later that night, Naomi called. Her voice was tight. "Grandma, Dad's upset. He says you're being manipulated." I smiled. "No," I said gently, "I'm being heard." There was a pause. "I knew something wasn't right," Naomi said quietly. "I just didn't know how to say it." "You said it now," I replied. "That matters." After the call, Mabel leaned over from her chair. "They always think silence is agreement," she said. "Until it isn't." I folded Leonard's letter once more and placed it back in the folder. This wasn't about revenge. It was about correcting a narrative that had gone unchallenged for too long. They thought moving me here ended my story. What they didn't understand was this: they had only given me time to plan the next chapter. The days that followed Evan's visit settled into a different rhythm, not quieter, more deliberate. I noticed how the staff addressed me now. Subtly. Questions instead of assumptions, updates instead of instructions. Word travels quickly in places like this, not through announcements but through tone. Someone had made a call. Someone had asked a question they weren't supposed to. Authority shifts are rarely loud, but they are always felt. Mabel Green noticed it too. "They're watching you differently," she murmured one afternoon as we sat near the window, pretending to observe the courtyard. "That means paperwork moved." "It has," I said. Leonard Price had called that morning, brief, efficient. He never wasted words. The revocation process had begun. Notices had been filed. Evan's power of attorney was no longer uncontested. It hadn't been stripped yet, but it was no longer invisible. That was the key. Power survives longest when no one questions it. The moment it's examined, it weakens. "You should expect pressure," Leonard had said. "Not legally yet." Personally, he was right. Claire called first. Her voice was warm, measured, exactly as I remembered it from every holiday dinner where tension was disguised as civility. "Ruth," she said, "we're worried about you." "I know," I replied. "You seem guarded," she continued. "We just want to make sure no one is influencing you." I looked at the wall opposite my bed, where a faint crack ran from the corner down toward the baseboard. I had noticed it weeks ago. "I notice things now. No one had to influence me to notice I wasn't asked," I said. "I noticed that on my own." A pause, carefully managed. "Evan was trying to protect you," she said. "From what?" I asked. She didn't answer immediately. "That told me everything." "Change is hard," she finally said. "At your age, at my age," I repeated calmly. "I understand consequences very well." Her breath caught, just for a moment. "We don't want this to become complicated," she said. "It already is," I replied. "You just weren't the ones affected before." The call ended politely. "Of course it did." Claire never lost composure. That was her strength and her shield. But politeness doesn't undo truth once it's spoken. That evening, Naomi came. She didn't announce herself. She never did. She waited until visiting hours and walked in like she belonged there, which she did. Her eyes scanned my face, searching for something deeper than reassurance. "You okay?" she asked quietly. "Yes," I said. "Are you?" She hesitated, then nodded. "Dad's angry, not at you, at the situation." "At losing control?" I smiled faintly. "Control feels natural when you've never had it questioned." She sat beside me, close but not clinging. Naomi had inherited something rare, the ability to be present without trying to fix. "I didn't know how bad it was," she said. "They made it sound temporary, medical." "They always do," I replied. "Concern is a convenient language." She looked down at her hands. "I'm glad you called a lawyer." "So am I." She stayed longer than she probably should have. We talked about ordinary things, her work, a book she was reading, nothing strategic, nothing heavy. But before she left, she said something that stayed with me. "They never asked me what I thought," she said. "About you." "Did they ask themselves?" I asked. She shook her head. The next morning, the administrator requested a meeting. That was new. He spoke carefully, reviewing policies, procedures, emphasizing how much the facility valued autonomy. He mentioned Leonard's name once, casually, like an afterthought. "Of course," he said, "residents are free to reassess their arrangements." "I'm glad we agree," I said. When I returned to my room, Mabel raised an eyebrow. "You've made yourself inconvenient," she said approvingly. "That's when things start moving?" They did. A letter arrived for Evan 2 days later. Leonard had warned me: legal language, neutral tone, notice of review, request for documentation, no accusations, just questions. Evan showed up that night. Alone, no Claire this time, no buffer. He didn't sit immediately, he paced. That told me more than any outburst could have. "You didn't have to do this," he said finally. "Yes," I replied. "I did. You could have just talked to me." "I tried," I said. "You had already decided." He stopped, looked at me like he was seeing a version he hadn't prepared for. "I was trying to keep things simple," he said. "For whom?" I asked. Silence. "You don't understand how hard this is," he said, "managing everything." I studied him, my son, older now, still certain the weight of responsibility belonged to him alone. "You mistook access for authority," I said, "and silence for consent." His voice dropped. "So what now?" "Now," I said, "you listen." He did, for once. I explained nothing dramatically. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't threaten. I outlined facts, timelines, what had been filed, what was under review, what would happen next. "You still have choices," I said. "But they are no longer unilateral." When he left, his shoulders were tight. Not angry, calculating. That worried me less than the alternative. Afterward, Mabel reached over and squeezed my hand. "They never expect patience," she said. "They mistake it for passivity." That night I slept deeply, not because everything was resolved, but because the balance had shifted. They thought moving me here had ended my influence. What they hadn't realized was this: distance had given me leverage, time had given me clarity, and restraint had given me credibility. Control doesn't disappear all at once. It thins, it becomes inconsistent, delayed, questioned in quiet places where it used to move freely. I felt it before anyone said a word. The morning staff began checking with me instead of informing me. A nurse asked whether I preferred breakfast in the dining hall or in my room, then paused, actually paused, while waiting for my answer. That had never happened before. Choices had always been presented as courtesies, not options. Now they were listening. Mabel Green noticed it too. She had a talent for observing the undercurrent beneath official routines. She leaned toward me during breakfast, her voice barely above the scrape of cutlery. "They're adjusting," she murmured. "That means someone above them is nervous." I didn't ask who. I already knew. Evan hadn't visited in over a week. Not even a phone call. For a man who once checked my medication schedule like a warden reviewing locks, his silence spoke loudly. Control, when threatened, often retreats before it reasserts itself. He was deciding his next move. Claire, however, couldn't stay quiet that long. Her call came that afternoon, routed through the front desk instead of directly to my room. That alone told me she wanted witnesses. Institutional language. "Safety theater?" "Ruth," she said, her voice warm but precise, "we've been hearing some confusion." "From whom?" I asked calmly. A pause. Claire hated direct questions. They forced her to choose a side. The staff, she said carefully. They're saying you've been requesting documents and asking about legal procedures. I have. Well, she continued, that's not really necessary. Evan has everything under control. I looked out the window as she spoke. The courtyard was quiet, leaves barely moving. Control always assumes noise, it never anticipates stillness. I didn't realize my curiosity required permission, I replied. Another pause, longer this time. Claire shifted tactics. We're just concerned, you've been under stress. Big decisions aren't always wise during transitions. I agree, I said. That's why I'm not making them quickly. She exhaled, a thin sound. Ruth, we're family. No, I corrected gently. Your relatives' family shows up. The line went quiet. When she spoke again, the warmth was gone. Evan will be coming by tomorrow. I'll be here, I said. I hung up before she could respond. That night, Mabel came to my room. Not openly, nothing dramatic. She simply appeared in the doorway like someone who belonged there. They're watching you, she said, but they don't know what for. That's good, I replied. She smiled. That's very good. Leonard Price arrived 2 days later. No announcements. No sign-in theatrics. He wore an ordinary jacket and carried a thin folder that looked unimportant enough to escape notice. Institutions overlook what doesn't demand attention. He sat across from me and waited. That was his strength. Silence without urgency. They believe authority ends conversations, he said finally. It doesn't. It just delays them? I nodded. Leonard outlined the situation plainly. Evan's legal authority was functional but not absolute. Decisions made without informed consent, without medical necessity, without transparency, those could be challenged. Quietly, methodically, you won't confront him, Leonard said. You won't need to. I wasn't planning to, I replied. He smiled faintly. Good, control collapses faster when it's ignored. That evening, Naomi called. Her voice was tight, careful, like she'd been holding something back for too long. Grandma, they didn't tell me where you were at first. I know, I said. They said it was temporary, that you agreed. I didn't. A breath caught on the line. I thought so. We spoke quietly, about small things, about how exclusion doesn't feel dramatic when it happens, it feels procedural, normalized, sanitized. They don't let me in the room when they talk about you, she said. I know, I want to be, she said. I should be. I'm working on that, I replied. Slowly. She didn't push, she understood timing. The next day, Evan arrived, no smile, no anger, just control wrapped in patience. Mom, he said, standing instead of sitting, we need to reset expectations. I looked up at him, calm, observant. Whose expectations? I asked. His jaw tightened. The facility's yours, ours. There is no ours right now, I said. Only mine. He tried a softer tone. You're reading too much into this. No, I said. I'm reading clearly. He stepped closer. You're safe here. I was safe before, I replied. You changed that. Silence stretched between us. Not uncomfortable, informative. You're making this harder than it needs to be, he said. No, I corrected. I'm making it accurate. He left without saying goodbye. That was when I knew, not that I'd won, not that things were over, but that they had finally realized something crucial. I wasn't confused. I wasn't frightened. I wasn't waiting to be rescued. And worst of all for them, I wasn't finished. Freedom rarely arrives with applause. It arrives when the room stops arguing with you. The change didn't come through Evan, or Claire, or even the administration, at least not at first. It came through routine, small permissions quietly returned. My mail began arriving unopened. Staff knocked before entering. A clipboard appeared one afternoon with my name listed under resident consultation instead of family directive. Language matters. Institutions reveal themselves through paperwork long before they speak out loud. Mabel Green was the first to say it plainly. They're preparing, she told me one morning as we sat by the window. When places like this get careful, it's because someone higher up has realized they pushed too far. Leonard Price confirmed it 2 days later. They know a formal challenge is coming, he said, calm as ever. Not today, not loudly, but soon enough that they're adjusting behavior to avoid scrutiny. And Evan? I asked. Leonard closed the folder slowly. He's been advised to stop acting? I nodded. Control, when stripped of certainty, becomes still. Evan had mistaken authority for permanence. He was learning the difference. Claire tried once more. She came in person this time, polished and careful, as if presentation might still rewrite reality. She sat across from me in the visitor's lounge, hands folded, expression sympathetic in the way people learn when they expect resistance. "You don't have to do this the hard way," she said. "I'm not," I replied. She frowned slightly. "Dragging lawyers into family matters, it escalates things." "No," I said evenly. "What escalated things was deciding my life without me." She leaned forward. "Evan was trying to protect you." "From what?" I asked. "Silence, from my independence, from my voice, from the inconvenience of my presence." She stood shortly after, smoothing her coat. "Naomi doesn't need to be involved in this." I looked up at her then, really looked. "That's not your decision." Her lips pressed together. She left without another word. Naomi came that evening. No permission requested, no announcement. She simply arrived, standing a little taller than before, eyes steady. "I talked to a counselor at school," she said, "about elder autonomy, about coercion." I smiled. And they said what's happening to you isn't care, it's control." "Yes," I said, "it is." "I want to help," she said, "not later, now." I took her hand. "Then you already are," Leonard filed quietly, not a spectacle. Not an accusation, just facts, timelines, signatures, omissions. Authority hates precision, it leaves no room for narrative. The response came faster than Evan expected. An independent evaluation, a review. A meeting scheduled without him. On the morning I signed the final document, the building felt different. Not warmer, clearer, as if something heavy had been removed without ceremony. "You're cleared to make your own decisions," Leonard said. "Effective immediately?" No cheers, no vindication, just truth restored. I packed slowly, not because I was weak, but because I wanted to remember what I chose to leave behind. The extra chair, the neutral walls. The routines that had mistaken quiet compliance for peace. Mabel stood in the doorway while I folded the last sweater. "Don't forget us invisible ones," she said. "I won't," I replied. She smiled. "Good. Someone needs to remember how places like this really work." Naomi waited outside with the car. No speeches. No explanations. As I stepped into the sunlight, I felt something unfamiliar and welcome: ownership of my own time. No one watching, no one correcting, no one translating my life into paperwork. Evan didn't call. Claire sent a message. Polite, non-committal, carefully worded. I didn't respond, not because I was angry. Because the conversation had ended the moment I was no longer required to justify myself. The house Naomi helped me move into was small, quiet, ordinary, exactly what I wanted. That first night I slept without locks, without schedules, without someone else holding my future in a folder. Power doesn't always roar. Sometimes it simply stands up, gathers its coat, and leaves without asking permission. And when it does, everything changes.